All right, welcome. I am so glad you all joined for tonight's program. Gabby and Lisa are absolutely incredible, and I'm just grateful to be in community with all of you tonight. My name is Elijah Marquez, and I'm the Community Education Manager at Mission Hospice and Home Care. Mission Hospice is a nonprofit and independent hospice. We've been serving the San Francisco Peninsula and the South Bay area for over 40 years now. And we believe that everyone in every phase of life deserves care that's aligned with their beliefs, wishes, and values. So we are very fortunate to be able to offer some really incredible programs to our community, including quite an extensive program schedule of education. Tonight's program included, we do movie nights, open mic nights, all kinds of really special offerings. So I hope to see your faces again. We also, in addition to that, have transitions, palliative, and hospice care services. And these are provided to all members of the community, regardless of insurance or ability to pay. So if you'd like to learn more about all of our services, you can visit us at missionhospice.org. And in addition, I know everyone will ask, tonight's program is being recorded, as I said, and it will be posted to our website. I'll put that link in the chat as soon as I'm done talking. And that should be up probably in about a week or so. So if you're interested in rewatching or sharing with friends and family, please go ahead and do so. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's program facilitators and my wonderful friends. We have Gabby Jimenez and Lisa Paul. Gabby is a hospice nurse here at Mission and Hospice and Home Care. She is an end-of-life doula, an author, a blogger, and a social media influencer. So her social media account on Facebook is The Hospice Heart. It currently has over 100,000 followers. So I'm sure there's some faces in this room that are in that group. And I will say, just a special note, if you're interested in hearing somebody's story of grief and love and loss and all of the gritty and beautiful things in between, Gabby is your woman for that. I strongly recommend just going to her her Facebook page for hope, for inspiration, and for a little, daily encouragement that just kind of brightens up my day. And I'm sure it would brighten up yours as well. And again, that's the Hospice Heart on Facebook, or you can visit her on her website, thehospiceheart.net. I'll throw that in the chat shortly. And then last but not least, we have Lisa. Lisa is a clinical social worker with over 15 years of experience in hospice and emergency medicine. Lisa helps people cope with illness, dying, and grief. She has a huge passion for sparking these conversations around end of life and just making sure that these conversations happen continuously instead of just at that end of life moment. And I will say Lisa is the co-creator of the Death Deck, which is a phenomenal game. I've played it with family, I've played it with friends. I really wanted to highlight that Lisa brings fun into this space, and it makes all of her work really makes death and dying more approachable and more really warm and welcoming conversation for people. So if you have family and friends who you are interested in reaching this subject with, I would really recommend you pick up the Death Deck and talk to Lisa. So you can do both of those by visiting her website at thedeathdeck.com. I'll throw that in the chat shortly. And then just a little bit of logistics before we get started. Please refrain from putting questions in the chat throughout the program. So Gabby and Lisa have collected the most pressing questions they've received in this space. And I have all of those in this magical jar here. So we will work our way through the jar of questions. And then should there be time at the end, we'll open it up to even more questions. And with all of that said, I will pass it over to Gabby and Lisa to kick us off in a very special way tonight.
Hello, everybody. It is, well, all of us, thank you so much for being here tonight. And it's just such an honor for us to see you here. And I hope that you know what it means to us when we do an event like this and people show up, that matters to us. And I hope that you know that never goes unnoticed and never becomes less appreciated. We are filled with gratitude that you are here tonight. It means so much to us. And our goal, both of us collectively, although I won't speak for Lisa, is that we hand over our tools to make things easier for all of you, to answer your questions, to reduce your fear, to clear up any doubt or insecurities or, anything that might leave you feeling uncertain. We want to give you the tools to be able to feel less fear. But before we start tonight, and before Elijah draws the first question, we talked earlier, and one of the things that we want to do tonight is take a moment and just pause. Now, initially, my motivation for this was because of the storms here in California. You know, we are not prepared for this here. This is not something we deal with often, and there has been a lot of damage and destruction. Globally, I think we're all dealing with something, you know, whether it's property or loss of job or friendships or relationships or death and dying and grief. All of it affects us in our heart. And we want to take a moment to honor each of you and everyone else out there. And if we do this collaboratively, if we come together and take a moment to just pause for all of them, imagine the difference it might make in this world. So please just take a moment. I'm going to light my candle. Lisa's going to light her candle. Elijah's going to light her candle. And we're going to keep this lit throughout today in honor of anyone who is struggling in any way, however that looks for you. We want you to know that you're not alone, and we're here for you. We think of you. We hold so much space in our heart for you. And most of all, just know that we're in this together and we are stronger together. So please just close your eyes for a moment. Just breathe and just honor them. Thank you all for taking a moment to do that. It means a lot to me, to everyone here, and to all the lives that we might touch simply by sending others this kind of energy and love and support. All right, Elijah, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, I've got my magic jar of questions here. I gave them a good shuffle before we got started. So our first question: I know I'm dying and I want to talk about it with my family, but they refuse to talk about it. What can I do?
So I'm going to start with that question. This is a question that gets asked quite a bit, or patients will talk to me about this. They'll tell me, you know, I know that well, let me back up. I'm a hospice social worker. And so a lot of my role is to provide emotional support to patients and families. And so when I enter a home, what I'm doing is I'm assessing the home, I'm assessing the needs of the patient and family, and then I'm providing the support and resources that they may need. So when this question comes up, usually it is a person who is well aware of what's happening in their bodies, but their family members are reluctant to talk about it. They're reluctant to talk about the fact that they're dying. And, you know, some of that is logistics. Sometimes we just get focused on caregiving and we focus on what's in front of us. And we want to manage someone's symptoms. We want to manage their pain. We want to make sure that that they're fed, that they're clothed, that they're bathed, that all of these things happen. And so these meaningful conversations sometimes don't take place. As well as those logistical factors, there's also, as a culture, we don't talk about death and dying. And as Elijah mentioned, that's why my co-creator and I, Lori, made the death deck, because we wanted to help people start these conversations. Because what I found working in emergency medicine and in hospice is that even when we have a serious illness or we have a pretty serious diagnosis, we may still be not talking about end of life and what the next steps may be. And so, so how I approach that in a home where, let's start with if you're in hospice or palliative care. So in that situation, what I'm doing is I'm meeting then with the patient and I'm being the person that they can talk to about death and dying. So the first suggestion that I have is for people to really utilize their social workers. This is what they are there for. This is what they are typically passionate about, is to be able to help facilitate these conversations. And so your social worker and chaplain can be a great resource to talk to about your feelings about death and dying. They can also help facilitate conversations with your family. So sometimes it can be helpful if the social worker or the chaplain talk to your family member separately. Or if you're the family member, you may have this conversation. And then try to bring the two together, you know, and have a conversation about what are you afraid that will happen if we talk about this? Because really what's underneath most of it is fear. We're afraid on some level. We're often afraid that if we talk about it, it's going to happen, or it's more real, and or that we might upset the other person. And you know, I regularly, and I'm sure Gabby does too, get family members who say, "Don't tell mom that she's on hospice. We don't want her to know she's on hospice because then she might give up." Well, in my experience, the people dying know that they're dying, and they know what's going on with them. And so sometimes what can happen is both sides are protecting the other one. Sometimes the daughter is protecting the mom, saying, "Don't talk about this, I don't want to upset her." And mom is saying, "Well, I know I'm dying, but my daughter doesn't want to talk about it." So if you have the support of hospice or palliative care and can utilize your social workers to start that conversation, it's a great resource for you. The other opportunities are to be able to say, "This is really important to me." You know, if you want to talk about this topic, and this is even true if you're the family member. If my mom is dying and I really want to talk to her about it and she's pushing me off, if I approach her in a way that says, "This is really important to me, this is important in my grief process to have these conversations. This is important for me to know how to take care of you. I want to take care of you the way that you want to be cared for." And unless we really talk about some of these end of life moments and choices, then I won't know the best way to provide care. And so, and some of these beautiful conversations that can be had are things like, would you like any music playing? You know, when you can't speak for yourself, do you want music playing? Do you want friends on in the background? Do you want an audio book? Do you want music? What would you like? How many visitors? Who do you not want to come in your home? Who should we tell, you know, Aunt Doris can't come in? Like she's chaotic and I don't want her around. These things are so helpful. I can't tell you the difference of when I go into a home where family members and everyone has talked pretty openly about end of life. There is a lightness. There's a very different feeling in the room because, quite honestly, people have done a lot of work to get there, right? They've had these conversations and they've come to a place of acceptance or at least openness about the conversation that they feel like less in denial, more in acceptance, and more prepared. And so, again, I encourage you to reach out to your supports. There's also, if you're not in hospice, like sometimes a particular patient will say, "I know you're not signing me up for hospice." Your family members may say, "I don't want to, no, I'm not doing that." And they just want to continue on with their plan, and so you don't have access to those resources, you can still contact your local hospice. The bereavement coordinator there is a great wealth of knowledge for additional resources to help you. And so that's another route that you can go. But these conversations are hard, and often it's, like I said, it's coming from a place where we don't have experience having these conversations. And so for those of us that aren't experiencing a serious diagnosis or illness, I really want to encourage you today to start thinking about some of these things and start having these conversations with your family members, because once you open the door and you start having a conversation, you can always return to it. You can say, oh, Mom, remember when we talked about that, a couple of years ago and you said this, do you still feel that way? Or, and like everything else, it takes practice to kind of talk about difficult topics, and it takes bravery, to be honest. And so if we begin at a time when we're not super vulnerable and stressed and chaotic and focused on the symptom management, it can help us later when that time comes, because we all are going to die, and we all are going to be in these medical situations with our family members or friends or family of choice trying to make decisions for us. Gabby, do you have anything to add?
There's not a whole lot to add to that, because I think you covered so much that's important. And I think I'll just echo what you said, which is, if we had these conversations sooner, rather than those moments when we find ourselves at the bedside, if we are sitting with the people that we love most of all, and we just tell them what we want, what matters to us, they will honor our wishes. But they can't do that if we don't give them the information. And things like the death deck is such a great tool to get those conversations started. And I find that when I'm, as a doula, if I sit with families early on at diagnosis, before they even start hospice, one of the first things I do is I sit down and I say, what is most important to you? What matters most? And like you said, Lisa, about, I start always the easy question, right? Which is, what's your favorite song? What do you want to listen to? What do you want as the background? And I always tap into things like the 5 senses, which helps gets the conversation started. What do you want to hear? What do you want to see? What do you want to feel? Who do you want there? Who do you not want there? But most of all, what matters most to you? And if you have those conversations early on, then it allows the person who loves you to be able to care for you on your terms. And if you don't give them the tools, then they can't do that. And we all deserve to have our wishes honored. We just have to talk about it sooner. So I agreed with everything you say, Lisa, in general, but about this topic especially.
Well, thank you both. And I'll add, all of you in the room should be proud that you're here, because if this is the first time you're having these conversations, that's a huge accomplishment. If this is the 50th time, that's just as important. So, great job for all of you for spending an hour and a half digging into this topic with us tonight. So I'll pick our next question in here. What happens at death? Gabby, why don't you kick us off?
Okay, so what happens at death? I mean, that is, people, actually, I think I'm going to go backwards a little bit. I had a gentleman who had been on hospice for a couple months, and he kind of did this sort of up and down where he declined, and then he kind of rallied, and then he declined, and then he rallied, and he always had a voice. And in the last few days of his life, I went in to see him, and I could tell he was definitely declining. And he asked me, he said, what's it going to be like to die? What am I going to feel? What is this going to feel like? And, we can't answer that for everybody, because we all go through it differently. So I think what I'll do is I'll simply say this. When our bodies start to shut down, there's physical things that happen and emotional things that happen. The reality that we're dying becomes a little bit more right there in front of us, right? That reality hits us. No matter how much time you've had to prepare for it, when it's actually happening, it becomes a shock to the person and to those who are saying goodbye to them. If they still have a voice, they have an opportunity to say things. But if they don't, then the family is going through what they are too. And what they'll witness is the body shutting down. Many times they'll sleep more. They'll sleep a lot more often. They'll refuse food and water, or you won't be able to feed them. It's important to know that in general, as we age, our throats might close a little, but as we start to die, our throats close and eating becomes more difficult. And I think we equate food and water as love, right? We want to keep promoting all this food and water. We think that's going to bring them comfort. But the truth of the matter is it actually makes it harder to die. So if a person starts to refuse to drink or eat, you need to respect that. You need to trust that. If they start to sleep more and withdraw and are less engaged in conversation, I know it's hard. It's hard for us on the bedside to witness that. Of course it's hard. But at the end of the day, what we want most of all is for that person in the bed to know that they are being cared for well. And part of that means honoring their wishes and respecting what they're letting us know, even if it's not verbally, right? If they refuse food, respect that. If they turn over and just want to sleep, respect that. The body is miraculous. It knows what to do. In many ways, we almost get in its way of dying because we're constantly throwing things at it, like medications and all the stuff that we do to try to get in there and, I don't know, make the landing softer somehow. But at the end of the day, the body knows what to do. Our role as either a clinician, somebody who's trained in the medical field, or even as the family or those caring for this person, is to simply honor them, to make sure they're clean and comfortable, to make sure that there is no struggle or distress. And the thing about dying is there's so many things going on, and it's not just a physical process. It is a mental, spiritual, emotional process. And you might hear moaning, right? There might be moaning, and many times that's pain, but it might not just be physical pain. So simply leaning in and just saying, hey, I'm right here. I've got you. That might comfort them. You've probably heard me talk before. I'm not a big fan of pushing too much medication. I believe that it is not always beneficial initially. I'd like us to try things like tactile and verbal stimuli, letting them know that you're in the room, letting them know they're not alone, making sure they're clean and supported and cared for well. And all of those things will allow someone to sort of succumb to what they're going through. And then if symptoms are unable to manage, if there's an extreme delirium or agitation, and yes, sometimes even pain, then yes, the medications are so important. So education about those medications is important. But what happens at the end of life, our bodies start to shut down and we react accordingly. And sometimes there's sounds that we're as observers are uncomfortable with, but it's a part of the dying process. Just lean in and be present and let them know they're not alone and that they're safe and cared for well. Some of the noises that you'll hear are just a normal part of the process. And you'll notice body movements and sounds and breathing changes. I don't use a lot of vital signs, and my reason for that is because I really want to see what's going on. I look at their eyes. Sometimes if the eyes are glossy or they stare off at something, sometimes as though they're staring through you and seeing something we don't see. The truth is, I believe they do see something we don't see, and I'm okay with that, as long as they're not afraid. And so I think I look at their eyes because I want to see where they're at. And if they're glossy, if they're glazed over, if they're off looking at something else, I have a feeling they're close. If their breathing changes and it starts to become a little bit shallow and slow, or they have apnea where they hold their breath for a moment and then catch their breath and start again and hold their breath, that tends to spread out, meaning that the holding of the breath is longer and the times that it happens comes closer together. That is an indication to me. If their breath is shallow, if they're breathing like a fish, or as some call it, the mouth breathing or out of water breathing, when they kind of, that to me is them sort of savoring the last bits of breath that they're going to have. And while it's sometimes uncomfortable to watch, that's not causing them pain or distress. That's them letting go. We have to trust that the body knows what to do and to only interfere if there truly is no other option. And if comforting them and leaning in and being there and being present for them works, then how beautiful is that? You did that. So I encourage you to try that first. And just to know again that the body knows what to do. I will say one more thing, which is I don't believe that there is pain at the end of life when that last breath is taken. I do believe that many illnesses, pain is one of the main side effects, right? That people suffer and there is pain. There is no doubt about that. But when that last breath is taken, I do not believe there is pain. Lisa, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Oh, I was just, visiting hospice patients today and watching a woman who has not had anything to eat or drink in 2 weeks. 2 weeks, and her family is there and supporting her, and in talking to the daughter as she's watching her mom, who was fish breathing, doing that same thing that you just demonstrated, and talking with her. And so again, I want to, part of my time here today, I want you to recognize the value that the social worker can bring, because the hospice nurses have so much that they're doing, and they are managing all the medications and the care for the patient. But us social workers, we get to spend more time, and we get to sit and talk with people about what that experience is like, watching their loved one, breathe like that, and what it's like to sit there and basically be in a waiting period now. She's waiting. She knows this time is coming, and she knows it's coming soon, but it's still, and she doesn't want her mom to die, but she doesn't want her to keep living like this. And so she's ready. And so as you were talking, I was thinking, it's so easy for us to say that they're not experiencing pain, or that it's, and I don't mean that dismissively, Gabby. I just mean it's much easier when we are the professionals coming in than it is with your loved one. When I helped take care of my grandma as she was dying, and a friend as well, when they started having some terminal agitation and when their breathing was changing, I suddenly forgot everything that I knew and felt very frantic. Is she okay? Which I knew that she was, and it took someone reminding me, and it took me remembering. But it's very hard witnessing your family member in this final stage, and it can be very hard when it's longer than we anticipate. So again, continuing to reach out for support during that time. I just really want to encourage you to do that.
Thank you both for your beautiful responses. And you talked both a lot about the experience of a caregiver. So our next question is very aligned with that. What resources are available to help cover the costs of caregiving?
Okay, for this one, I'm going to look at some notes here and there, everybody, because working in hospice, predominantly, I've worked in hospice for 15 years, and I worked in emergency medicine for 8 years. And both of those opportunities are at times when we aren't necessarily able to see people through these processes. So that's why I'm going to reference a little bit of notes here. But the first, when you're trying to take care of your family member and you want to keep them at home, that's what we'll be talking about. The first option is if your family member qualifies for Medicare, or I'm sorry, Medi-Cal. So in California, Medicaid is called Medi-Cal, and Medicaid as a federal program is financially based. So you have to be very low income to qualify for Medi-Cal. So within Medi-Cal and Medicaid, if you're out of state, there is a program called In-Home Supportive Services. And this program is in place to help cover the cost of caregiving. Predominantly how it's used is family members can get paid to care for their own family member through in-home supportive services. You can also hire someone who is employed by IHSS. And so that can be difficult. So again, that's a resource from social workers can help with that. So Medi-Cal is the first way. The second way is the Veterans Aid and Attendance Pension. So Veterans Program has two, the Veterans Administration has two programs available. There's Veterans Aid and Attendance, and then the Directed Home and Community-Based Services. So the aid and attendance is a rare kind of asset for you that you can get cash to help cover the cost of caregiving. And this program, they actually are not required to know how you're spending the money. So I'm going to talk about that first. It is cash. You have to have 90 days of active duty. So these are active duty benefits. Honorably discharged, physically require care and meet their requirements, and then financially qualify as well. So if you are higher income, you will not qualify for this benefit. This benefit is also available for spouses of active member veterans. So this is really something to look into. I know Elijah put it in the chat. There's also Veterans Directed Home and Community-Based Services. This one is, this one provides a monthly budget to assist with caregiving. So it's not, it's a little different, and it is coordinated through with the caregiving agency, or you can also get paid yourself. But any of these veteran benefits, as you would imagine, are somewhat lengthy to access. And so again, your social worker has some great tips for that and can help you. And it can also help just be on the phone with you while you call them, because some of these phone calls and gathering information can be really difficult. So, so with that, it's also physical requirements and active duty. This program, the second one, the Directed Home and Community-Based Services, does not require you to qualify financially. So this one is more accessible to everyone regardless of finances. And then the fourth way is California's Paid Family Leave Act, which many states have a paid, well, some states have a paid family leave. And so what this is you can get paid to care for your family member for up to 12 weeks. And that does require a physician certification, but it's relatively easy to do. When my mother-in-law was dying in Michigan, I was able to apply through California, the EDD, the same place that if you have a medical disability, short-term disability, same website, same place. And I was able to apply and receive paid family leave while I was taking care of her in Michigan while I was in California. So it's a really great program. The downside is it's only 12 weeks. So sometimes family members will tell me, well, I don't want to take it yet. I'm trying to figure out when to take it. And so with that, I say, continue talking to your hospice providers, and they can, give you their suggestions for when might be a good time. Typically, if someone is on hospice and they are requiring your care and attention and you want to be there, then I encourage people to take it, because we don't know what the next steps are going to be. We don't know. Sometimes people live much longer than we think. Sometimes people live much shorter than we think. So California's paid family leave, which Elijah put in the chat. And then the last one is long-term care insurance, which this one is only accessible if you've been paying in. So most of the time people buy a policy or start paying into a policy, you know, in their middle age or around there, and then they're able to access this money. What I'll say about long-term care insurance is that it's also, they often will have a wait period so that you have to fulfill like a 90-day wait period after you meet all the physical requirements. Your social worker can also help with advocating to waive that wait period. Sometimes they are able to waive them. Sometimes there's a hospice waiver, so they really need to know that this is a hospice patient. Or if you come onto hospice and you've been using long-term care insurance, there may be additional support that you can get. So again, communicate with your social worker. We can help, the hospice team usually can help with the paperwork. I'm speaking generally. I've worked for a couple hospices. So again, every hospice kind of operates differently, but these are the standard things that social workers help with. We help with resources and emotional support. So those are the 5 programs in California that may help, one being a private insurance. And, you know, what I'll say in addition to that is that it's really hard. I meet with families every week who are trying to figure out caregiving, and it's the number one thing that we're all struggling with. And really, we're gonna, you know, our healthcare system, we're gonna have to figure it out better, because the cost of caregiving is so high. It's getting harder and harder for people to remain in their homes like they want to. And so I always encourage people to get a little creative as much as possible. You know, we work with people as we talk about caregiving plans, and sometimes, you know, well, first of all, there's a lot of caregiving pieces. I think we have enough time to kind of dive into this a little bit more, but with sometimes the person that needs care doesn't want care. And that happens a lot. And so that can be very difficult for family members to navigate. You know, I know dad needs someone with him, but he keeps sending the caregivers home and he won't let them stay. And that happens a lot. And what I'll say on that note is, we can have the best intentions for our family members, but the person that needs the care is the one, you know, they still have a right to assert their needs too, and to give their input and to say, I don't want the caregiver here. When that happens, it can get chaotic, and it's very difficult for families to figure out what to do, because they're worried that dad's going to fall if no one's there. And, you know, families deal with it differently. Some put their foot down. Some say, nope, you're going to be there, and this is how it's going. Some, you know, check in more frequently or have family members come by. So one family in particular that I worked with recently, because they had quite a few local people, right? So it all depends on what you have available for you. But, you know, they had created quite a network of people, because, you know, dad didn't want to pay. He didn't want his hard-earned money to go towards caregiving, which is another piece, right? I worked so hard, and to watch it just dwindle down by caregiving, especially when the person doesn't think they really need it, it's very hard. It's hard on both parties, because the person experiencing it, really, it feels like a loss to watch your money that you work so hard for just be depleted like that. And you may have this idea that you're going to leave this money for your family, and that you worked hard with that in mind, and you want your kids to be able to have a down payment and all these things that people are planning their money for, if they are lucky enough to have that kind of nest egg. And so what I would encourage people, when either the person doesn't want caregiving or when there isn't finances for it, that's when we get creative and enlisting the help of close friends, enlisting the help of family members, coming up with a schedule. You know, sometimes family members are reluctant to help until you give them a job and you say, on Thursday, you're going to bring dad dinner and stay with him for a couple hours. Okay. And then they'll, okay, just tell me what to do. People get overwhelmed. They don't know how to slide themselves into the equation. They might be feeling reluctant to initially help. But what I see most of the time is if there's organization and there's effort made, that oftentimes there can be more people to support than we initially think if we get really creative. Let's see. And then I think the thing to keep in mind as you're thinking about caregiving is that it isn't always best for someone to be at home. They may not want to be at home. They may have behaviors or symptoms that are just too difficult to manage with what's available, you know, and if the resources aren't there, there are some really lovely, if there's not resources for 24-hour care, which is incredibly expensive, and family members can't provide the care, you know, there are a lot of great boarding cares and residential facilities, and some that are horrible. So, you know, you have to look around and again, ask, if you're on hospice or palliative care, ask the social worker, what are your thoughts? Who do you know? What are your recommendations? What's a good fit? We're lucky enough in the South Bay area of Los Angeles to have a boarding care specifically for end of life. And so this is a wonderful option that we are just so blessed with. And so it's called the Caring House in Torrance, California. And they basically are meant for the last couple months or less of a person's life. And I know there's back and forth of hospice houses, and you know, across the country there's more hospice houses, and in California there's less, and so every state is a little different with that. But the hospice house or the boarding care that's specifically for end of life care, these are very different than a standard place, and so that they can be a very beautiful place to spend your last days. So I think we get really focused because we all have a desire or think we want to be home, but sometimes that isn't actually practical, and it can't happen. And I work with families where there's so much guilt about it, and what I'll say is if you remain involved and you continue to visit and you are present, and the care facility that your family member is at knows you're there and you're on top of things, then your family member is going to get much better care than if you aren't present in that way. So if it isn't that you can care for them at home for a slew of reasons, that's okay too. There are a lot of great other options, and I just want to just gently tell people not to feel too guilty about that. End of life is unpredictable, and caregiving is hard, and sometimes caregiving can go on for 10, 20 years, and that's a really long time. So be gentle with yourself. Again, reach out to your social worker for resources. Anything?
Well, I certainly, I think you shared it all. You know, one of the most common things that are misunderstood in hospice is that caregiving is provided. I can't tell you how many families will say, so when can we get the caregiver to start? And they really truly believe that. And when we tell them that fear and worry is just, it's overwhelming. And so I have to say, you know, again, hospice does not provide caregivers. what hospice provides is a home health aide, which can come 2, 3, sometimes more times a week. They can come and do bathing, which is beneficial and will help the caregiver, whether it's a partner or family member that's providing the care. And that's very helpful. We can also provide volunteers to add for respite to give the family a break, but we cannot provide caregivers. So it's really important that people have the resources that you just listed, Lisa, and to know that there are many options, and it is incredibly expensive. There are less affordable options. There are things available. There's things in the insurance that might be that you didn't even realize you had. All of this is where the social worker is such a benefit to the family. So it's important to know that caregiving is not provided by hospice, but to please reach out to your social worker and ask them what is available to you, because that is one of the beautiful things that they bring to the experience, is that type of assistance, support, and resource.
One more thing before you move on, Elijah. Gabby just reminded me, thank you. Hospice. So hospice is covered by Medicare. If you have Medicare, it is a hospice benefit and it is covered 100%. And within the hospice benefit, there is an eligibility for respite care. So you can qualify under your hospice benefit to have a 5-day respite care. This respite care is provided in a skilled nursing facility. So but what that can do is, we'll often have times where maybe a family member has a surgery scheduled, or they have a wedding to go to, and they want to arrange respite. And so that is then contracted between the hospice facility and a skilled nursing facility, so that the person, the family can have a break. So you can ask your hospice provider about the respite benefit, because that is available to you too.
Lisa, I'm glad you added that one more thing, because I know insurance questions are frequently received. So that is an excellent thing to note. And this was a subject you all, and before I jump into the question, I know I'm putting a lot of links in the chat. Don't worry about recording those down. I'll make sure that all of those are emailed out. And then they'll also be in the description under the YouTube video as well. So you can all just dig in and pay attention. You don't have to write anything down unless you want to. All right, our next question. We're jumping around the before, during, and after. So this takes us to the during. Will the morphine or other medications end their life?
Wow, I can't tell you how many times I have heard someone say, my mom was put on hospice, they gave her morphine and she died. And I understand that fear. I have the luxury of having this experience working in hospice. And so I know what those medications do. I also understand the disease process and how our bodies shut down, how our bodies react to medication, how they benefit oftentimes from medication. And here's the thing, when you start hospice, and I'm just going to start with hospice, not any other situation, but when you start hospice, you are given a kit of medications, and they vary from hospice to hospice. In ours, we get the morphine, the Ativan, which is also called lorazepam, and we provide haloperidol, which is also called Haldol. All of these medications collaboratively tap into pain, delirium, confusion, agitation, restlessness, shortness of breath. Some of them work for other things like the Haldol and the haloperidol. They can help with nausea. And so there's some things that the medications that we have learned to do that we can navigate most of the symptoms. When someone is dying and medications are being used, from my perspective and experience, the amount we use is just too small to end a life initially. Now, if the symptoms are being managed and they need more scheduled medications and those are increased and we're giving more, the goal of that is usually at this point to try to reduce the symptoms, sometimes to get them to become a little bit more sedated, so that because the symptoms are not being managed. But at the end of the day, the medications are not what ended their life. The diagnosis, the illness, the disease process did. But family members, they don't come to this experience with that knowledge. I mean, I have the luxury of having it, as I said, but most people don't. And morphine is scary. You know, the idea that you're giving my mother morphine makes me so afraid. And I'm afraid giving it because I'm going to think I'm killing her. So I like to start with right away, the minute I meet with a patient, is to educate them about the medications that are in that kit. Tell them what they're there for, what they're used for. Also, let them know that it's not something they have to do right away. And if they do call, for instance, in the middle of the night and triage says, okay, give them this, this, and this, but you're afraid, ask them why. Ask them what this is for. Ask them to send a nurse. Because I personally do not ever want that family member to have that hovering over them. And if they don't have the experience and they don't have the education, then who's teaching, you know, who's going to teach them? Who's going to give them that information? That's our role. So I want them to have as much education about the medications as possible. I also want them to know that they have permission not to use them until they feel comfortable with it. They need to ask more questions. So when someone says to me, did I kill my mother? I'm going to say no. The diagnosis, the disease process, that killed your mother. What these medications do, if given, whether they're given as a needed, which is also called PRN, or if they're given scheduled, which is every couple hours or even less, what that medication does is it taps into what the body needs to reduce whatever they're experiencing, giving the body permission to let go with a little grace and succumb to what it was already going through. And so do they die after taking these medications? Yes. But very rarely is it because of the medications. And the only way that you can reassure a family member of that is if you educate them. These medications are scary, all of them. We use other medications like phenobarbital or methadone. The negative connotation that weighs heavy on these medications elicits fear in a very big way. Our role as hospice clinicians is to educate, is to reduce fear. Personally, I think that needs to be really expressed in the beginning, but when you're going through an admission process, right? Some of you might be admission nurses. You have so many things that you have to hand over to that family. They can't possibly take it all in and get it all, right? So what I think is really important is that we follow up after that visit, whether it be with a phone call or a quick visit, even if the case manager can't see them right away, because sometimes it takes a few days. Just call up. Is there anything you're afraid of? Is there anything you're unsure of? And it's usually and almost always about the medications. If you explain what each medication is for, and we'll start with morphine. You know, morphine is a scary medication, but morphine can reduce pain. Morphine can reduce shortness of breath. Now, Ativan and lorazepam can reduce agitation, restlessness, and anxiety. Sometimes you'll hear us say, give the morphine and the Ativan together. And families think, why? Why are you making me give so much medication? Well, it's really important to understand that sometimes the pain increases the anxiety, and the anxiety increases the pain. If you give these two medications together, they can almost, I would say 90% of the time, simultaneously bring down both, bringing comfort. It doesn't always work that way. Sometimes these medications can cause the opposite effect. Does that happen? Absolutely. Very rarely. But I had a patient who had extreme shortness of breath, and the morphine caused that to exacerbate. So how do you, what is the best thing to do then is to take it slowly, to administer the medications, to see what benefits it brings. You know, we have an order that is to give it once, and this is our PRN, our as needed. You give it once, and if it's not effective within an hour, you give it again. If it's not effective after that second dose, you call hospice. Now, the reason for that is because we want to know what you're using. We want to make sure that we are on top of what kind of medications you're using, how often and how effective they are. If after that second dose it's not working, then we want to help with that. We want to maybe suggest a different route or a different medication or a different dose to increase it or to try something new. But these orders are there for a reason. It's to be able to manage the medications. But when you put these medications in the hands of someone who doesn't know, and they think more will be better, and so they just keep giving more, does that cause the death? Yes, in some ways I can see where that is, but most times it doesn't really resolve the symptoms. So you want to start with education. You want to make sure that they understand what these medications can do, what they're there for, the benefits they bring. And if you do that, if you educate them enough, then that can reduce some of the fear. So if they do call, for instance, and talk to our triage nurses who are very familiar with these meds and very comfortable with them and have a lot of knowledge about them, and they say, and they suggest, give a PRN dose of morphine and give a PRN dose of Ativan, do this together. I want that family to say, okay, that makes sense to me. Because it's really important that the fear is reduced. Because if that patient should die after taking it, I need that family to know that they didn't kill someone they love. That is so important. Mm-hmm. What they did, in my opinion, and most cases, is that they gave the person the medication they needed that allowed the body to finally experience some peace, a reducing of the symptoms, and allowed them to succumb what they were already going through anyway. And that's really important for the family to hear. We have to remember that what we take into the home of a patient and a family member is very different than what they have with them, right? We are not God. We don't know it all. We don't have, what we do have is the tools and the experience to help guide and support the family so that they feel confident in our care, but also perhaps even in doing the care themselves. And it all is about education. So I'm going to say this one more time in case you have a patient that asks this, or maybe you think you might have pushed or hastened a death. The medications that are given at the end of life do not end the life. The disease, the dying process, that ended the life. You just gave the body peace and comfort so it could succumb to what it already was, and for their landing to be softer than it would have been.
Gabby, I'm just going to add one thing.
Yes.
I was seeing a patient today, and there was talk about that her mom has some pain, and the caregiver said, "Well, we're not going to give morphine because that'll be the end. Once we start, she'll die." And so I provided some education about that, and of course, encourage them to talk to the nurse who's doing wonderful with education. But sometimes our paid caregivers have a lot of beliefs about morphine, and that can complicate things. And so as our hospice team, part of our role is also to educate the caregivers. And, as the social worker, if it's an agency that I have a relationship with, I'm going to call the caregiving agency and talk with them about doing some further education, because the caregivers should, that's not helpful for that family member to be receiving that information and have this more fear instilled. And then the second thing, in my life, I have had some medical issues, and I have taken morphine and lorazepam for different periods of time. And I'm revealing that in an effort to say, like, morphine is used. It's actually one of our lesser pain medications now. There are much stronger medications. In our hospice, we use fentanyl patches a lot because it's very helpful with, providing that low level of pain relief. And it's just a little patch. And but fentanyl, of course, it's much, much more potent than morphine. So just to give you perspective, as a 45-year-old, I've taken morphine, and I'm smiling at you today. So, morphine doesn't kill. I just want to reiterate that. It is the disease process that is happening. And sometimes our resistance to give in medications when they're really needed, in my opinion, it does kind of increase some suffering. if the person is really needing the medication and they are in pain, and we're not able or willing to medicate, that can be really difficult, and that can be difficult to watch as a family member. So that's the other thing to keep in mind, is that in your grief process, you're going to remember this time, and you're going to remember these moments, and you're going to remember what your family member looked like and experienced. And what I see often is that once the medications are given when they're needed, the level of anxiety in the home goes down, and people are there's just more peace. So I just want to reiterate what Gabby had to say, and just encourage everyone to talk to your hospice professionals when you have questions about the medications. And if you hear things from other people, recognize that that is their opinion. Caregivers, sometimes they have an expertise to them if they've been caregiving for a while, but and I value that work so much. And also, they're also in a position of power, because we spend a lot of times, caregivers spend a lot of time with family members, and our family members who haven't gone through this experience look to them as expertise. So if you are receiving that kind of feedback from your caregiver, or you're hearing that sort of thing, talk to your hospice providers about it. They may want to be like me and call the caregiving agency. They may want to help facilitate some education, because usually, like Gabby said, it's about lack of education. It's not maliciousness. It's not that anyone wants anyone to suffer. Of course, there's fear, there's lack of education, and so education.
That was a really good point, because I witnessed that a lot. And it's twofold. There's the medication aspect of it. There's also the feeding part of it. A caregiver, especially a caregiver who has been with this family for quite some time, has built a relationship with them, and they have been providing care beautifully up until this point. And when this person is starting to decline, their job responsibilities change. And I do believe that sometimes, relative to food and water, they feel this desperate need to keep doing that, as though that's what's going to keep them alive. And they feel that holding the medication back will keep them alive. And so what I try to do, I respect the caregivers on so much, because they are incredibly up close and personal to the patients in a way that we are not. And so their input and their eyes are so valuable to us. So I like to take time with them. I'll ask the family member if I can invite the caregiver in, because it's important that they're all on the same page, that we educate them and hand them over the tools, because they too are having to change their role with this person. What they used to provide and what they're providing now is going to be different. I like to also say, okay, so feeding and pushing food and water, that's not going to be helpful. And this is why, because you have to tell them the why so they can understand. But here's what else you can do. Because if you're going to take a responsibility away, I think it's really important to give something else that they can do, so that they can have the opportunity to still provide the care that they've been wanting to provide. But with the caregivers especially, it's important to include them in the education, and to also ask them. Like, I've asked one caregiver who was telling the family member not to give the morphine. Don't give it. Don't give any of this. This is going to kill them. And the family member felt, like you had said, kind of at their mercy, like, okay, I won't give it because, they said this. So I'll actually sit down with them and say, tell me your experience. Did something happen once that has caused you to think this? Tell me where this fear is based, because I want you to know that you're not going to do that, because they might have fear too. And it might come from a whole different place. How can we support the caregiver in whatever that, whether it's a hired caregiver, family member, anyone who is providing care at the bed? It comes down to exactly what we've been talking about, which is education. We need to support them with the knowledge and tools and experience that we have, so that they can make a more productive choice for the care of this person who is dying.
Thank you, Gabby and Lisa, for your incredibly thoughtful answers, as always. I've chosen our next question from our magic question jar here, and we are jumping ahead to after. Are there options besides cremation or burial?
Okay, this one I'm going to make brief so we can get to our next couple questions. So part of my role as a social worker is to talk about these final arrangements. And you know, most often people say, you know, that they're going to be buried or they're going to be cremated. And those are the two things that we talk about most frequently. But I just wanted to give you just a little input, information on a couple more options. The first is green burial. So I'm here in the Los Angeles area and we have very few options in our area, but in Northern California, you have a lot more. And so I did include a link with all of those. I think there's about 10 in the state, maybe, that are green burial locations. And what green burial is, the person is not embalmed. The burial container is biodegradable, whether it's a shroud or a wooden box, so it can just dissolve into the ground. They're not placed in a concrete vault. There's no marker. It's a very natural, natural burial, and of course it's more eco-friendly as well. The next thing is sometimes called aquamation or water cremation, or alkaline hydrolysis is the technical term, but it's basically using water instead of fire for cremation. This is more available for pets now. My little cat T-Bone, we used aquamation for, and the ashes come, they're a little finer. It's a little different experience than cremation remains. It's also more eco-friendly, of course, because we're using water and not burning. Cremation and burial remain are less. Cremation and burial remain our least environmentally friendly options. The next thing is human composting. Human composting is very new. Seattle, Washington is the first place to be doing it. And there's a few providers so far. California has legalized human composting, and several other states have as well. And we are, moving in that direction. In California, you can use human composting. We can, basically, you can coordinate with a couple of the providers in Washington, and they will help you with that. What this is transformation of the human remains into soil. I included a link of Return Home because I really like their video and their process and how they talk about it. But basically, you can do some more research. There's other options, but this is a way that you can. It's a very, very, very green option of basically like our food that returns to the earth, so do we. So that's human composting. And then the last one that is I don't hear talked about a lot, but I have had some families choose, and it's been really an interesting process to watch, and that's the whole body burial at sea. And so that is an option. So sometimes, a lot of times, people will scatter cremated remains in the sea, but you can also do a whole body burial at sea. So basically, the whole body's going into the sea. So that's another option that you may not be aware of. That a lot of places, a lot of mortuaries will help you facilitate a whole body burial at sea, especially in California, where we have the sea in so many places near us. So that's what I have for that.
So that, I just want to make sure that everybody knows this. And this is just from the nurse's perspective, when someone has died, my role as a nurse or whomever is assigned will go to the home and put a time of death on there. At that time, we are required to call the funeral home. So it's really important that this is decided on and you have a conversation about this early on so that that information is in place. Now, our role is to call the funeral home so that they can come and pick the body up and take it back. Everything else you can decide later to those details, but it's really important that you try to get that in place and that it's not something you have to do at the last minute, because that's a lot for you to do. You've just said goodbye to someone you love, and now you have to suddenly think of a name, and that there is, in most, I don't know what it's like everywhere else, but at least here, if someone dies in a facility, there's a very short window of time that they're allowed to be in the facility. So if it's, say, 4 hours, for instance, you have only that amount of time to hurry up and make a decision, make the phone call, and arrange for them to come. Here, it takes almost 2 hours for the funeral home to show up because they're usually coming from somewhere else or just depending on traffic. So the time frame is very little. And it's so, again, to have that in place is helpful. When you die in home, the timing is a little bit more, you're given quite a bit more time. I mean, you could be hours. So you have the luxury of that time. But it is important that you make those decisions prior to the last breath. It makes it easier for you and for the nurse who shows up to pronounce.
And I'll add one last thing before you move on, Elijah. I'm so glad you brought the processes up, Gabby. I think that's really important. And I always tell family members that we're going to call the mortuary when the nurse comes after your loved one has died. But you can let us know that you don't want the body picked up right away. You can keep your family member at the home. You can keep them at the home for a few days. We're going to give you some education on how to preserve them during that process, but you don't have to rush. Sometimes families, there'll be a family member in Northern California and they want to come down and see their sister before the mortuary picks them up. So and sometimes people just want more time. So there is no rule. If your family member is at home, there's no rule. If they are in a facility, unfortunately, the state dictates that there is a time frame of 4 hours that the body is picked up. So again, reiterating what Gabby said, if you make these decisions ahead of time, there's so much less chaos at that time of death. So we really encourage you to do that.
Now, Lisa and Gabby, we have about 15 minutes left. Do you want to use that time to jump into another question from the jar or to jump into one of the grief questions?
I say the question in the jar.
All right.
And we just have to answer it quickly.
Perfect. So let me pick our next one. Why are they taking so long to die? When do you think they will die?
Oh, this is such a hard one because, so I'll give an example. I had a woman who was dying, and first that process took a little time, right? And she had 2 beautiful daughters who were right at her bedside, providing support, kind of going through what if we have time, we'll talk about, but the anticipatory grief, right? Preparing themselves for the fact that their mother was dying. As a doula, I did a couple, rituals with them, honoring her body. I mean, we really just every day, we did something beautiful. We did a beautiful bathing and an anointing and just some other beautiful rituals to just, make these days a little less difficult for everyone. And then she just wouldn't let go. She had stopped eating. She stopped drinking. She wasn't in any pain or distress. So she wasn't even getting any medications at this time. She just wasn't ready to let go. And this went on for days and days and days. I think it probably took another almost 2 weeks before she died. Maybe not that long, but regardless, the idea is that this family has gone through all of their anticipatory, right? Planning, preparing, acknowledging, grieving, and then they sit and wait. And the daughter said to me, "Why is she taking so long?" And my answer was this, and keep in mind that I understand this is probably not, this was just my answer. I said, "Your mom is 92 years old. That's a long time to live. It's going to take her a long time to say goodbye to her life, her memories, her body. You know, imagine she's thanking her feet, her arms, her hands, her heart, the belly she carried her daughters in, her brain, her eyes, her mouth, everything that she's experienced in all of those years. Maybe now that she's finally comfortable, you know, she's gone through years worth of illness. Maybe now that she's finally comfortable, she's able to just stop for a moment and pause and just say thank you to her body and say goodbye in a fashion that works best for her. Now, is that the truth, or is that really what happens? Of course, we don't know. But what I do know, and I said this earlier, is about the body knows what to do. And it's not really for us to interfere and push it. And we are not God. We can't just suddenly make someone die like that because everyone else is so comfortable now and they're ready for it that it should happen now. What we have to do is be more realistic with the families and say, and we say this often, this can take hours to days, but not insinuate that it's going to happen soon, because the minute you do that, those days and sometimes weeks can really weigh heavy on the family. It is very hard for them to go through that and to sit day after day and to not leave the bedside because they don't want to miss that one moment, because there's many times during that period of time where their apnea will be so long that you think this is it, right? I can't tell you how many times I've told the same family, okay, I think she's close. And then she lived a couple more days. And so we can't rush it. We can't push it. What we have to do is prepare the family that this could take some time and that it's okay to step away. And this leads me to the question that I also get is I left the room. I walked away. I've been there every single day, every hour. I slept at her bedside, right? And I got up to go to the bathroom or get some food or take a shower or change my clothes. And she died. Did I let her down? Did she feel alone? Did I abandon her? My answer to that is no, because this is what I truly believe. I don't think they take with them who was there at that last breath, but who was there all along. Some people don't want an audience. Some people don't want you hovering over them at that very last breath. Some people want some privacy. And that's just, we have to remember that their experience, while we have a reaction to it, is not about us. If that body is going to take a little longer to let go, then that's when we encourage the family to just step away. Just step away. Take a break. It's okay. You will not be letting them down or abandoning them or leaving them to die alone because you stepped away. In fact, many times, if they were given the opportunity to be asked and could answer, they would probably say, honey, go take a shower, get something to eat. Please don't do this. You don't need to do this for me. They don't take with them who was there at that last breath. They take with them who was there all along. And if they should linger a little longer, if it should take longer than we expected, if their dying process is just longer, then we need to take a moment and just pause and accept that that's how it's going to be. If they are suffering, if there's delirium or agitation or pain that is truly unbearable to watch, then you talk to your doctor and nurse about that. What can we do? Is there medications that we could give to maybe sedate them a little bit more so that they don't have to go through this? We don't want them to linger for days in that phase, right? But if they're peaceful, and if they're just laying there and they're not in any distress and they're not struggling, you have to find a way to make peace with it, because that's just how it's supposed to be, even though it's hard.
There's a couple comments that I just wanted to note. Elizabeth commented that it can also be a final act of love to spare their loved ones, seeing them depart. And I believe that. I believe that. I think, sometimes, mom still wants to take care of her kids, or, somebody wants to take care of their partner still. They don't want them to watch them go. It can be potentially that. Now, again, we don't know these things. These are the things that, based on the information we have, that we propose, we think. And then Francesca noted that some people need permission to go or permission to die, which I agree with. I do caution people from like just lining up and saying, go, mom, it's okay to go, and one after another. I think if I was that person, I don't know if I would, how that would feel to me. So I like to talk to families about, you know, in their conversations, talking about how they're going to take care of each other, and what now, assuming this was a great person in your life as you're at their bedside, talking about those moments and reminiscing and speaking in such a loving way, and again reiterating, I'm okay, you know, Susie and I are going to watch out for each other, we're okay, mom. And it's okay to say, it's okay, you can go. That I'm not saying you can't say those things. I just also think that we can do this in such a beautiful way by really highlighting and focusing on our relationship and all the loving memories that we have of them. Because I always picture, what would I want to hear as I'm laying there? You know, I want to hear these wonderful memories. I want to hear people talking about, you know, the time we went here and what happened then, and that funny story that happened. And so I really encourage people to do a lot of reminiscing at bedside. In the active dying phase, we do kind of caution people a little bit to not have too much stimulation all at once. You know, we don't want necessarily a crowded room for 6 hours as the person. We sometimes see more pain and agitation and symptoms when there's too much stimulation, but you know, usually family members find that balance of coming in a couple together and talking at mom's bedside and sharing stories. And I think this also is a loving way, and whether or not that really in that particular instance helps them let go, again, we won't know, but we can think about what we would want if we were laying there. And I think as caregivers, family members, caregivers, any kind of caregivers, if we continue to provide care in that way of what would I want in the sense of what would feel good as a whole. Again, hopefully you've talked about it and you know specifically what they want, but if you don't, what intuitively feels good, and what will help them feel more at peace and confident that they led a good life, that things are resolved, that they can, that their life is complete and they did a good job.
That was beautiful, Lisa. You know, you brought up a really important point. I know our time is short here, but the idea of the room and the energy that we leave in the room. I just wrote a blog about it. Someone had asked me, how many people, why don't they let more people in the room? Why is that? You know, I was just told that we can only have 4 to the room. Well, families, especially large families, they all want to gather in the room. And I get that, right? Because everyone wants to be there. But at the end of the day, I truly believe, and I'm going to echo what you said, the person lying in the bed is dying. They do, I think, want to know how loved they are, and they want to feel that love. But all that energy, everybody else's stuff is swirling around that room. The chairs are being moved to make more room for everybody. The phones are going off. Conversations are happening. How can you possibly let go with peace when all that distraction is happening around you? Respect the person in the bed. Give them all that love, but do it in smaller doses.
Thank you both, and thank you for everyone putting your experiences in the chat. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be able to read all of those. So I appreciate everyone sharing so much. Gabby and Lisa, we have time for one more question. Do you want one from the jar or the anticipatory grief one?
I'll let Lisa decide.
Let's go to grief. Do we have another grief question?
We do. We're saving those.
Gabby's grief come? Gabby's
in the magic jar.
Uh-huh.
We do. So this question goes, why does it feel like I'm already grieving my family member even though they're still here?
So I know we have 3 minutes. So what I'll say is, as Gabby was talking about anticipatory grief, that's the grief that we experience when our family member or ourselves is facing a terminal illness for the most part, and we begin that grieving process. So what we can expect about our grief process, people ask me, what can I do? I feel like I'm going to be lost. What's going to happen afterwards? And so my biggest suggestion is to be building your support people now. Whatever stage you are in life, you need people to walk alongside you, because as we get older, life just gets harder, in my experience. Our family members get sick, our parents die, our siblings die, our friends die, our spouses die, partners die, kids die. I mean, these are really hard things to go through. And so I encourage people, your grief process is going to be unique to you. Everyone's grief is so individual, and it varies so much. But if you build a good network of support that you nurture through you give to them just like they give to you, then when you face these times of grief and loss, and even caring for someone else, you have this little army by your side. And even if it's only a few people, that will carry you. So build your supports. Gabby.
Oh, that was beautiful. I want to just stress that if someone is going through this right now, right, they are anticipating the death of someone they love, understand that that is real. And that grief is equally as painful as the grief that will happen after. And it's a real thing. I was sitting at my brother's bedside for 21 to 18 days. And I, as a hospice nurse and a doula, I have all the tools you could imagine. I felt completely lost. And I just kept thinking, is this the last day? And then I was anticipating the last day. And it weighed so heavy. And even though I'm familiar with it, it was as though I had no idea what that even meant. Anticipatory grief is the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, all of that combined reaction to the fact that someone you love is dying. And that is painful. So if you know someone who is going through that, please don't question it. Simply reach out and say, how can I help you? Can I sit with you at the bedside? Can we go for a walk? Is there anything that you need that I can help you with? And understand that if they're going through that it is so real. And then when that last breath is taken, that's going to take on a different shade. It's a different shade of painful, right? And that's real too. Grief is never going to go away. Don't tell anyone that it should be done now. Don't tell anyone they should be over it. Don't tell anyone else how to grieve, because it is not about us and we don't get to do that. Our role as just kind and compassionate human beings is to reach out to those who are grieving in whatever capacity, form, shape, or time of this experience, is to simply let them know they're not doing it alone.
And Gabby posts a lot about grief on the Hospice Heart Facebook page. So there's a lot of very emotionally beautiful language that she uses talking about her own grief experiences recently, which I think is a great resource. There's a lot more grief resources. Sorry, we don't have time to list or create resources for all the wonderful grief resources out there. I will say that, Elijah, if you can just add refuge in grief when we, as another one, refuge in grief. I really, really like this particular her style, because she's very matter of fact about grief and talks about exactly how unique it is and how individualized it is. And so that's another resource for you. But grief is a personalized experience. It's ongoing. Your hospice, your local hospice has bereavement support. So again, as part of the Medicare benefit, hospices provide 13 months of bereavement support for the family. And you are eligible for that if you are a family member. And so you let your hospice team know if you'd like those follow-up phone calls. And there's also bereavement groups. And if you are not part of a hospice, you can reach out to a hospice if you are grieving, and they may allow you into their grief support groups, bereavement groups, and they'll also have other amazing resources for you. The bereavement coordinator at your local hospice is a tremendous resource for you.
I know we're got to cut this short. If you go to my website, it's the, which I think that Elijah shared in the link, there are some podcasts and interviews, some of which Lisa and I have done together, that are all about grief. We give resources, we talk about grief in a more detailed fashion. So I do invite you to visit that. They're free. You can listen to them anytime you want. You can share them with your friends or family. Lisa and I have worked a lot with other really incredible people to create resources available to you to understand the grief process. So please visit that often. It's very helpful.
That was a beautiful segue. All of the resources that we've shared tonight will be included in a follow-up email, so don't worry. I know a couple of people had asked questions about the different resources mentioned. We might even add some bonus resources. I'm sure Lisa and Gabby will think of some as soon as the program ends. It always happens. But I would love to pass it over to Gabby to blow out our candles, and with that, we will call it a night. Right before that, though, I just want to send my message of appreciation to both Gabby and Lisa for leading this beautiful program tonight, and all of you for joining us in community. So thank you all. And Gabby, please close us out.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We appreciate it more than you know. And this candle was lit at the beginning of this event with the idea that we would collaboratively send energy to anyone who is struggling. It was inspired by all the storm damage that people here in California are experiencing, but it goes bigger than that. It goes to anything that we are going through, anything anyone you know is going through. The struggle is real. And as a community, we can stand stronger if we come together with kindness and compassion. And we took a moment of silence to honor anyone who is having a difficult time right now. And as I blow this candle out, I'm going to watch the flame until it's gone. And what that indicates to me is that someone out there has received our message. Don't stop sending candle lighting. Don't stop sending messages. Don't stop caring for others. And don't stop reaching out. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you all for coming. This has been such an honor, and we're just so grateful to be able to share our passion and information about end of life. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful night.